Hey everyone, this is Reviews at Ryan. So I'm going to do a little walk, rant, and talk here about this movie that I checked out on Shudder called Perpetrator. It stars Alicia Silverstone. You may recognize that name. Other than that, though, I don't know any of the other actors or actresses in the movie. It's a weird movie, so I'm not even going to read you guys the plot like I would normally do from IMDb. I'm going to go ahead and just describe the plot, and there's going to be spoilers in this. So if you don't want to know spoilers, then come back and watch this video later. Before I even talk about this movie I really did not like at all. I would say this movie is very close to probably top 5, top 10 worst film of the year by far. It really is that bad, and I'll go ahead and explain what happens in the film. And you know, there's not really much to like about this film. I would say this film's probably even worse than Bad Things that I just reviewed. And I know you guys hear my bad review sometimes with Shudder. You don't hear anything too great. I promise they have some decent films, but this is definitely not one of them. So we're first introduced to this chick named Jonny, and she's going through different houses and she's doing like different robberies. She's stealing drugs and everything. She takes these drugs and she gives them to her dad, and her dad ends up taking them. And there's a part where he literally falls down on the ground and he's literally bleeding profusely from his head. And it looks like he's dead, honestly. And then she sits next to him in the bathroom and she starts singing and talking to herself. And then all of a sudden he starts talking again, which was really strange. They get into this argument, and then before you know it, she gets sent to her aunt's house, played by Alicia Silverstone. And what you find out is her 18th birthday, and she makes her a cake, but this isn't an ordinary cake. It's a menstrual cake full of menstrual blood. Find out that apparently she is part of a witch covenant in which they have these special powers. And when they have these special powers, apparently their face morphs into, I don't even know what you even want to call it. Like their face like bubbles and it goes into like a different like dimension, or I really can't describe it. It's super weird. After all that happens, also they have these hallucinations and they build these powers. He builds these like dreams of like blood and water, and she uses these powers to trap, I guess, like her enemies or something. It's basically like a portal, and every time she uses these powers, she ends up bleeding from her nose throughout the film. As the film goes on, there's another side story too. Apparently there is this intruder that is kidnapping young girls and taking them to this lair to torture them. So that is a second part of the story, because she also is in high school. She has all these other girls that are disappearing. So her main mission is she wants to go find this kidnapper. When she goes to try to find this kidnapper, he actually kidnaps her first. While Jonny is kidnapped, we find out that the kidnapper is trying to connect this tube into her, like a USB port type deal. And apparently he has a hole in his body too, and he's trying to connect this tube into the hole into his body. They exchange fluids, and in the process she's crying, and she also mimics him, which really pisses him off as well. As the kidnapper is getting pissed that she is mimicking him, he ends up knocking Jonny out. And when she wakes up and she sees all the different people that he's kidnapped, including some of her friends, and one of her friends that she saw at school, she says that he is using these parts or different parts of their body to make him younger. And what she ends up doing is she ends up trying to trap this killer into her little dream sequence that she does. They call it like it's like a blood trap or something like that, like a blood puddle attraction or something like that. It's just super weird because every time she does it, like she just bleeds out like she's on her period. It's super freaking weird. Jonny escapes, and then we see that Jonny's mother shows up. We didn't know where her mother was in the film. They never introduced her or anything. And apparently the mom has kind of the same kind of powers as Jonny, but she can basically smell, I guess, Jonny, and smell like where she's going to be. She ends up smelling this perpetrator, I guess. And then we go flashback to the school, and we find out that in the school, their principal is the one that was the masked man trapping these girls, and he had this flesh-like USB port where he was trying to connect these different girls to his body. Johnny's mother ends up kidnapping the principal, and they stick him in their van or whatever. And Jonny, she's fighting with Principal Burke, and she ends up ripping out his heart and killing him. And also, he basically admits that he was taking these girls to actually take their parts and remain younger. And it's some whole metaphor about how, like, older people, they want to be young again and such like that. That was, I guess, like the whole basic story. There's some really strange scenes in here. Like, there's one scene where the principal is in the school and they're doing like a fire drill, or like a kind of like a shooter. Like, if you ever did like in like high school where you did like shooter training, like if somebody would invade the school, they do one of those, and he puts on a mask and he starts shooting the kids with like water guns and stuff. Super awkward scene, but I think also with that scene it makes sense that he was the perpetrator all along. I really didn't care for the acting that much. I felt like the performances were very wooden and lifeless. The plot seemed very nonsensical, and it definitely had a Cronenberg-esque to it, but I just felt like it was a movie that, you know, it had a lot of visuals, and it had a lot of things really bloated into the runtime. It just didn't really work for me. I just felt like, you know, this whole thing with Jonny and the coming of age story and her whole menstrual blood, like, entrapment thing with, you know, these powers, because also she's also growing fangs at the end of this movie. So, you know, she's like a half like vampire, like witch-ish covenant thing. It's super strange to actually explain and break down. And, you know, it's not a movie where you watch it once and you can get everything out of it. I think it's one of those movies, if you wanted to watch it again, you get a little bit more out of it. You know, I definitely say that I didn't like this movie. You know, there's things in a horror movie I like, and, you know, visually this is very good, but, you know, the acting just really dragged it down for me. I also felt like all the characters, they're playing high school characters, all in their 30s, so it just didn't make sense to me that, you know, we have these older characters, you know, playing high school kids. I also felt like the editing was really terrible. It was very messy. Transitioning from scene to scene was very messy. It felt like, to me, you had a bunch of different filmmakers that took a bunch of cameras, they filmed a whole bunch of different scenes, they smashed them all together, and they said, how are we going to edit this? And how are we going to make this a film? And they all looked at each other and said, I don't know, just throw it all on the film. Who the hell cares? You know, it's just, a film like this is just, it needed so much more work to make it even work as a film. And I can't even imagine trying to edit this film and even put it into a cohesive story, because it tries to be way too artsy. And, you know, it's not really a scary film, but it just couldn't decide what it wanted to be. I mean, you have covenants here, witches, powers, a kidnapper, just way too much. Like, what genre of horror is this trying to be? And this movie just fails on all levels for me. So as far as a score for this film, I would give it a 1 out of 5. I thought it was pretty bad. The visuals, like I said, were pretty good. I hated most of the characters for the most part. And I just felt like, you know, they just bloated the film up and just didn't do a good job of making a good story. So those are my thoughts on this film. If you've seen it, let me know. I'd be really curious to hear what you guys think. I know a lot of the reviews on Shudder are pretty bad, so I think this movie, it definitely annoyed people. But I'd be really interested to hear what you guys think. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys on my next review.